Welcome to episode 8 of the Red Book Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, and one that hopes to go beyond character bios, basic history lessons, and summarising Tolkien Wikipedia pages. In the last episode, I explored a very important debate from my favourite chapter of The Lord of the Rings, the Council of Elrond. The discussion about the threat of Sauron and the One Ring, specifically looking at the options discussed and how to deal with the Dark Lord and his ruling ring. I explored the reasons why taking the ring to Mordor to destroy it, or attempt to, was the only sound course of action. Despite it being the most difficult choice, it was also the right choice. As always, before getting into today's episode, I want to say that each episode of this podcast can be viewed on my YouTube channel, found using the handle @TheRedBook. My YouTube channel is where most of my discussions about Tolkien's works can be found, and there are many videos waiting there if you're interested. And if you're someone who wants to generously support this project in another way, then you can join as a member on YouTube or a supporter on Patreon. Links can always be found in my descriptions. Supporters get access to members-only content, live streams, Discord servers, and you can listen to these episodes or watch my videos before they're made public. This episode will focus on two figures that I often discuss, the Dark Lords of the Legendarium, Morgoth and Sauron. Why do they fight what appears from the outside to be a hopeless conflict against the forces of good? With both figures knowing about the existence of Eru, or God, having been created by him before aught else was made, why doesn't his existence give them any pause? Or does it? I want to explore what we are told about Morgoth's place in the world, his changing attitude towards creation as he fell further into darkness, and why his greatest servant, his lieutenant Sauron, decided it was wise to take his place when his great master fell at the end of the First Age. This will be framed around the mysterious figure of Eru, his role in the physical world and its unfolding history. I think a good place to start here is to paraphrase from Tolkien's letter to Milton Waldman, estimated to have been written about 1951. This is, in my opinion, a letter that should be read by anyone interested in Tolkien's writings. It's a letter that goes into great detail about the role of the Valar, elves, men, and Eru. Great detail. It goes into the cycles of Arda, and through its pages it lays out the history of the world that we readers obsess over today. Tolkien even starts this letter by saying that after being asked for a brief sketch of my stuff that is connected with my imaginary world, it is difficult to say anything without saying too much. The attempt to say a few words opens a floodgate of excitement, and Tolkien's excitement for his created world flies off the page when reading this letter. But why is this letter important when it comes to the seemingly hopeless conflict of the Dark Lords against the servants of God, against good? Well, we get Tolkien's own thoughts on the music of the Ainur, outside of what was published in the edited Silmarillion after his death. The music being the act of imagination and unity, leading to the shaping of history and the world itself, performed by Eru's first creations, the Ainur, a group containing spirits we would later recognise as the Valar and the Maiar. It is a letter that is fundamentally important when it comes to understanding, or attempting to understand, the figure known as Eru, especially to non-Christian readers like myself, as I'm sure most of us can agree that Christians would be able to grasp the concept of Eru swiftly, and he can be hard to understand or even accept for non-religious readers. Despite not considering myself an expert by any means when it comes to the theology within Tolkien's Legendarium, I'd go as far as to say Eru is grossly misunderstood by many non-religious readers, seen as a harsh and somewhat brutal cosmic dictator who allows the suffering of untold numbers in Middle-earth when he has the power to stop it. Theodicy, the vindication of God related to the problem of evil, something that has been debated and discussed in our own world for thousands of years. Why does a good God permit the presence of evil? Even though I am willing to explore such a deep question, I don't really like to bring personal views of such matters into my attempts to understand Tolkien's Legendarium, and I prefer to dedicate vast amounts of time in learning about his secondary world as a mythology in its own right. Eru's existence in the Legendarium has no bearing on my real-world beliefs or lack thereof, and so it is in letter 131, where Tolkien confirms that Eru is God, and the Valar are the powers or lowercase g gods. To understand Eru's role in all of this, we can look at the role of the Valar. They are the angelic powers. Their function is to exercise delegated authority in their spheres of rule and government, not creation, making, or remaking, according to Tolkien. We can call them divine, as they originally existed outside the world before it was even made, beings granted purpose and authority by God. Their power and wisdom come from the knowledge they hold of what Tolkien calls the cosmogonical drama, the creation of the universe in what they perceived as a story, composed by someone else, Eru. Eru as God, the All-Father, the One, has the power to allow this drama to unfold as reality, and that is what he does by giving shape and substance to the imagination of the Ainur, through the music of the Ainur. But none of these angelic powers know how this drama will unfold completely, to the most minute detail. This is because the knowledge of the creation drama was incomplete, so incomplete that if each of the Valar, or the collective Ainur, pulled together their knowledge and understanding, they would still have an incomplete knowledge, and it would still not allow a full understanding. Again, by design. This lack of full understanding is partly what allows a rebel like Melkor to rebel in the first place, but would also allow the powers the chance to redress that rebellion, to allow the completion of all and an ultimate finesse of detail. If all would be revealed to these beings of free will, then why create them in the first place? If the Ainur had the collective knowledge of Eru himself, then he could have performed the music of creation on his own. The disparity between all of the Ainur and God, between the members of the Ainur, allows creativity to manifest itself in wonders of imagination. This is achieved through harmony and unity, beings of individual will coming together to improve on what they offer to the music. But it would also be naive to think that all creativity or imagination would be for the betterment of the created world. Turning from the path set out by Eru is what then defines evil. As we are told in the Of the Enemies section of the Valaquenta in the Silmarillion, great might was given to him, Melkor, by Iluvatar, and he was coeval with Manwë. In the powers and knowledge of all the other Valar he had part, but he turned them to evil purposes, and squandered his strength in violence and tyranny. Essentially, figures like Melkor were permitted to use their free will, to use the great power held, all while being unaware of the completion of a greater plan. It is why in letter 200 to Major R. Bowen from 1957 that Tolkien speaks of Eru introducing themes into the original design, which may be unforeseen by many of the spirits he made in realization, while allowing unforeseen events, happenings that could not be predicted without a complete knowledge of the past. When Melkor introduced alterations in the great music, alterations and not interpretations of the mind of Eru, it was Eru who blended that discord into the music, displaying the alterations with the original theme as a visible history. Melkor's role in the music being just as valid as the role of Manwë and others who did not rebel. His own vision could take its place, melding discord with harmony, adding a creative input unimaginable by others with less might and arguably less selfish creativity. Tolkien is telling us that Melkor from his original discord was not cast down, but even had his alterations become manifested in a vision of the world. Melkor was permitted to rebel, and his own discord would still devise a greater good in the end, even if he or others could not see it. Then Iluvatar spoke, and he said, "Mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor. But that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Iluvatar, those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see what ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined." The Silmarillion, Ainulindalë, the music of the Ainur. Now that might be a lot to take in, and I still think I'm scratching the surface of what is one of the most complex branches of Tolkien discussions. What's my point? It's that despite Eru being an all-powerful god, capable of seeing infinite outcomes of infinite possible decisions made by those inhabiting the world, it is incorrect to say that he would willingly and directly intervene when the free will granted to his creations was utilised in a way that would or could cause harm to others. One can't be granted partial free will. It's all or nothing. And when we speak of an unfolding history over eons, a larger plan is at work beyond the horrific conflicts of Middle-earth's ages. It's what makes a god basically unknowable to us, in my opinion. If the Valar can't fully understand or comprehend the mind and plans of Eru, why would we arrogantly assume that we can, or judge the Valar and Eru for action or inaction? Though I obviously understand why many continue to judge them harshly. Could Eru crush Sauron and Morgoth? Of course he could. Would he? Evidently not. I'd say a blatant act of direct intervention on the part of Eru was the drowning of Numenor, with the isle falling beneath the waves and the world itself being changed in the process, if we believe the cosmology story of Arda is told to us. This was the land given as a reward for the suffering of the Edain in the cause against Morgoth. The Valar, governors of the world, granted them this island raised from the depths, removed from the dangers of Middle-earth. It was on this island that the realm of Numenor was founded. It would grow in wealth, wisdom and glory, under a line of great kings of long life, directly descended from Elros, brother of Elrond, and son of legendary figure Erendil. But a shadow fell on the island. Immortality was craved. Elves and the Valar were envied, and death was feared. As the shadow grew, the lifespan of Numenor's inhabitants cowered beneath it. They became conquerors rather than benefactors, feared and not revered, and the downfall was sealed when Sauron was brought to the island as a prisoner originally, and he quickly pushed corrupted men over the edge after they stood on the precipice for centuries. But when Eru intervened, this act was not to punish Sauron, as I have read and heard some claim. Sauron was taken in the catastrophe, forced to return to his land of Mordor as a disembodied spirit, unable to shield his malicious will through a fair form ever again. But this was an act of God dealing with Numenor itself, and not a corrupter of hearts who stuck a knife in when Numenor was already mortally wounded. But the land of Aman and Arisia of the Eldar were taken away and removed beyond the reach of men forever, and Andor, the land of gift, Numenor of the kings, Elena of the star of Erendil, was utterly destroyed, for it was nigh to the east of the Great Rift, and its foundations were overturned, and it fell and went down into the darkness, and is no more. And there is not now upon earth any place abiding where the memory of a time without evil is preserved, for Iluvatar cast back the great seas west of Middle-earth, and the empty lands east of it, and new lands and new seas were made, and the world was diminished, for Valinor and Arisia were taken from it into the realm of hidden things. The Silmarillion, Akallabeth, the downfall of Numenor. If Eru was dealing with Sauron, wouldn't he have done this in a different way? Why would he do it now, and not when he fled the judgment of the Valar, the forging of the Great Rings in an attempt to corrupt the firstborn children of Eru, the elves? Why would he allow Sauron to return to his fortress, rebuilding his strength, and continue to trouble the world as a tyrant? Sauron is, once again, bringing about his own downfall, through his own free will and deeds. He will be defeated, but not at this moment, and his defeat will come at the hands of those who he has hurt the most, fulfilling the plan of Eru for the second-born of his children, men, to inherit the world. While talking about direct intervention, another clear example is the return of the wizard Gandalf to Middle-earth, following his fall against the Balrog in Moria. It was not the Valar who sent Gandalf back. Eru took up the plan of the Valar, those who originally sent the wizards, the Istari, to Middle-earth in the first place. As each member of that order fell from their high errand through lack of patience, lack of care, or a lack of presence in the growing conflict, Gandalf stayed true to his purpose, but sacrificed himself in a moment to save his friends and the quest from absolute failure, despite being a figure needed in Middle-earth to aid in the defeat of Sauron. Gandalf the Grey was no more, and Eru sent back Gandalf the White, with greater purpose, wisdom, power and authority. Gandalf really died, and when he passed out of thought and time, his sacrifice was rewarded by Eru, and he returned to complete his task. He was sent by a mere prudent plan of the angelic Valar, or governors, but authority had taken up this plan and enlarged it, at the moment of its failure. Naked I was sent back, for a brief time, until my task is done. Sent back by whom and whence? Not by the gods, whose business is only with this embodied world and its time, for he passed out of thought and time. The Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, Letter 156 to Robert Murray, 1954. These acts of intervention show that it is certainly not the case that Eru is waiting and waiting before deciding enough is enough, before proceeding to smite each Dark Lord into oblivion. It's not how Eru works. The letter I just quoted, Letter 156, speaks of the powers having their business concern the embodied world and its time. Eru has stepped in, but only when something happens that is not under the purview of an inhabitant of the world. When the Valar gave up their authority over Arda during the blasphemous invasion of Valinor by the men of Numenor, who else steps in? Only the greater authority they appeal to. When Gandalf dies and passes from the world, leaving Middle-earth in dire straits, who can step in? Only he that exists outside of the embodied world and its time. Morgoth and Sauron are a part of the world, choosing to enter it when it was made, having the choice to remain outside of it as countless other Ainur did. They descended into it, and should be dealt with by the world, much like the One Ring is a product of Middle-earth, and should be dealt with by Middle-earth. The Valar do not step in every moment someone is in danger, and Eru does not step in every time a being with the free will to turn from him and commit horrid acts chooses to do so. But what about Morgoth and Sauron? I've explained the role Eru plays in the world, but the Valar still exist. What do they think about their actions? Despite Morgoth being the first Dark Lord, making it logical to discuss him first, I find Sauron to be quite a curious case, since he witnessed what the servants of Eru could do when his master was completely overwhelmed at the end of the First Age, in the War of Wrath. When the host of the Valar arrived in Middle-earth, seas of orcs were washed away, Balrogs were cast down, and the black foe of the world Morgoth was dragged back to Valinor, and eventually cast out of the world itself. Sauron knows the Valar exist, being fearful of their judgment when he sought pardon for his actions, asking one of his order, Eonwe, for pardon. And he clearly knows Eru exists as well, as do all of the Ainur. Why does Sauron attempt to imitate, in a way, what his master ultimately failed to do by achieving dominion over the inhabitants of the world, acting against the servants of Eru? To understand the motives of Dark Lords, the Notes and Motives in the Silmarillion essay found in the History of Middle-earth, Volume 10, Morgoth's Ring, is the best source of information. It is here where Tolkien really gets into the mind of a second Dark Lord, a follower who became a tyrant in his own right. Sauron apparently deluded himself with the notion that the Valar as a group failed, Melkor included, and this led to Eru abandoning at least Arda, but possibly Ea, the universe, deluding himself into thinking Eru no longer cared. This was almost solidified by the shocking reaction to Numenor's failure, the changing of the world, in essence removing Aman from the physical plane. To Sauron, this removed the powers of the West and the elves there from effective control, placing men under the curse and wrath of God in Middle-earth. Even when the Istari appear, as I discuss in my video on YouTube of Sauron's knowledge of the wizards, Sauron sees them as emissaries from the Valar, which is right, but emissaries seeking to establish the power that was lost when Eru separated Aman and Middle-earth, an attempt to colonise Middle-earth, an effort of defeated imperialists, and most importantly for this discussion, without knowledge or sanction of Eru. His cunning motive is probably best expressed thus: to wean one of the God-fearing from their allegiance, it is best to propound another unseen object of allegiance, and another hope of benefits. Propound to him a Lord who will sanction what he desires and not forbid it. The History of Middle-earth, Volume 10, Morgoth's Ring. Notes on motives in the Silmarillion. Tolkien is answering the question for us. Sauron would become an insincere atheist who preached atheism because it would weaken resistance to himself, all because he ceased to fear God's actions in Arda. Replace Eru, replace the Valar, but eventually set himself up as a god made flesh in Middle-earth. He knew Eru as much as even his own great mind could understand, but his knowledge was still limited when compared to the likes of Manwë, the king of Arda, one who knew the mind of Eru with the greatest perception and understanding of all who dwelt in Arda, alongside another figure, Namo, the doomsman of the Valar. With Sauron believing that the Valar had lost their power and authority, and that God himself no longer cared, why wouldn't he step in and attempt to shape the world to his own will? Tolkien saying in the same essay that Sauron still had relics of positive purposes, descending from the nature in which he began. The Valar were apparently uninterested in protecting it, saving it, or working to make it better. The downfall of Numenor and the changing of the world acted as the catalyst for Sauron, both acts changing the responsibility that was once held by the Valar, and the care for the world that led to God bringing the designs of the Ainur into reality in the first place. God was dead to Sauron, and the Valar weak. This helped Sauron's ego grow to monumental proportions, believing himself to be the saviour of Middle-earth through shaping it to his will, the greatest of wills that still dwelt in this land, having never abandoned it. This means that Sauron's conflict was not hopeless to him. It was an opportunity, his delusion pushing him into a desire for a position of power, where he could shape the world and the minds of those within it. With Morgoth, I have discussed his motives and desires numerous times in episodes and videos, such as the marrying of Arda and Morgoth's ring, of Melkor's desire for the Silmarils, and of Melkor and the Secret Fire, if you want to check them out. His conflict is interesting in that he is the progenitor of rebellion, one of many rebel gods found throughout various stories, though they differ in motives most of the time. The Titan, Prometheus, tricking Zeus, who was enraged enough to steal light and warmth from humanity, Prometheus defying the gods to steal fire to return to mankind, essentially stealing knowledge and representing free will against divine authority. And while I am certainly not an expert in theology, as you will quickly learn, often deferring to other more qualified Tolkien enthusiasts and enjoying their own analysis of such topics, the similarities between Melkor and Lucifer are there for all to see, though my view of Lucifer is shaped more by Milton's Paradise Lost than Scripture. Don't attack me for that, please. I think of similarities with how others react to Melkor, and what he is given authority to do, without being cast down or outright destroyed. Lucifer, like Melkor and even Prometheus, challenges the authority of God, rebelling against what is considered fair, and in the case of Lucifer and Melkor, eventually lying about God. They stand as opponents of authority, or the authority, causing suffering while standing as a beacon to those who can stray from God's will. One of the great similarities for me is the struggle of the angels in comprehending lies and deceit, something that happens in Tolkien's Legendarium with Manwë, when Melkor's sojourn in the halls of Mandos was over. Then Manwë granted him pardon, but the Valar would not yet suffer him to depart beyond their sight and vigilance, and he was constrained to dwell within the gates of Valmar. But fair seeming were all the words and deeds of Melkor in that time, and both the Valar and the Eldar had profit from his aid and counsel, if they sought it, and therefore in a while he was given leave to go freely about the land, and it seemed to Manwë that the evil of Melkor was cured, for Manwë was free from evil and could not comprehend it, and he knew that in the beginning, in the thought of Iluvatar, Melkor had been even as he, and he saw not to the depths of Melkor's heart, and did not perceive that all love had departed from him forever. The Silmarillion, Chapter 6, of Fëanor and the Unchaining of Melkor. Manwë, through his own purity and innocence, is unable at this time to grasp the concept of Melkor's evil, and in his goodness he is willing to forgive Melkor and return him to the fold, which is the duty as king of the Valar, to sway those who turn from the allegiance of Eru, to bring all who strayed back onto the true path. He simply could not understand the deceptiveness of Melkor due to his own inexperience of being deceived, due to his own purity and kind heart, something we should admire and not mock. Eru had created all with free will, and would not just turn Melkor to dust as soon as he rebelled or fell to corruption. It goes against the whole idea of creation in the first place. Manwë eventually does realise Melkor's deceit, and yet he would still have goodness within him to attempt to sway Melkor from his evil path, until it was clear that Melkor was so far gone that he could not be swayed. Melkor has the freedom to provide an alternative, to challenge authority. Just like Adam and Eve can be tempted, others are given that choice or allowed to be offered that choice and deal with the consequences of their decisions. A difference for me when it comes to Melkor and a figure like Lucifer comes from what they are hoping to achieve with their actions. I will make myself the Most High, or I will set my throne on high. Lucifer, from my understanding, seems to want to become like God, and is attempting to pervert mankind into his own image. Melkor at a time, of course, wished for the power of Eru, to shape creation as he saw fit, to be blessed with a greater power than any in the physical world were to receive, but he quite quickly, in godlike immortal being terms, realises that he cannot obtain this power. The flame imperishable is a power of God and is with him. It cannot be found and utilised. Melkor even has the wisdom to realise he cannot challenge Eru directly, understanding he will never be the ultimate power in existence, but possibly the greatest power in creation. To Melkor among the Ainur had been given the greatest gifts of power and knowledge, and he had a share in all the gifts of his brethren. He had gone often alone into the void places, seeking the imperishable flame, for desire grew hot within him to bring into being things of his own, and it seemed to him that Iluvatar took no thought for the void, and he was impatient of its emptiness. Yet he found not the fire, for it is with Iluvatar, but being alone he had begun to conceive thoughts of his own, unlike those of his brethren. The Silmarillion, Ainulindale, the music of the Ainur. This shifts Melkor's ambition, and he eventually turns to nihilism, to the corruption and ultimate destruction of the world and those within it, with the gift of free will to work his own will into his devices and machinations. He abuses his power by fighting the Valar at every turn, seeking to rule the kingdom that has been made, but not the kingdom outside of time, where Eru himself dwells. Melkor descends into Arda and immediately declares it as his kingdom, and anyone who denies this or attempts to shape it to their own will is challenging his self-proclaimed authority. Eru does not tell Melkor to stop what he's doing. Why would Melkor cease his actions? And if Eru told him to stop, would Melkor the rebel obey? Eru has already told Melkor that he is incapable of imagining anything that does not have its source in him. Everything Melkor attempts to shape through his own desire, everything he corrupts or breaks, becomes a part of the plan of Eru, just as it was with his original discord. In the music of the Ainur and the unfolding of history, Melkor is an instrument. What does Melkor do? He falls to his corruption and madness. The Valar fight him, he challenges them. The elves challenge him, and he seeks to corrupt them and destroy them, twisting them to ruin their perfect image placed into the world by God. He works against everything that exists in order to unmake it, and if he can't unmake it, he will corrupt it, attempting to shape this world of Eru and the Valar into Melkor's world, unwilling to accept that his actions are still part of Eru's unknowable plan for existence. Even when Melkor brings orcs into the world, apparently the biggest insult to Eru, he is allowed to continue. When he fights the Valar, causing the symmetry of Arda itself to shift, he is allowed to continue. Instead, Eru shows the results of Melkor's actions, the resulting beauty from evil, beauty and wonder like the snow and the frost, as we are told in the Ainulindale, the music of the Ainur. Behold the snow and the cunning work of frost. Melkor hath devised heats and fire without restraint, and hath not dried up thy desire nor utterly quelled the music of the sea. Behold rather the height and glory of the clouds, and the ever-changing mists, and listen to the fall of rain upon the earth. Melkor does not realise that his conflict is hopeless. Well, it's only hopeless for what he wants to achieve. It is a worthwhile conflict in the plan set out before time. He keeps fighting because it's all he can do to try and prove Eru wrong. Before the plea of Elendil at the end of the First Age on behalf of elves and men, Melkor, having poured so much of his power into the earth in order to control it, is remarkably close to victory in Middle-earth. Look at all he accomplished in his rebellion. In all that time he dwelt east of Valinor and set himself up as a tyrant. Why would he suddenly think that Eru would go and step in now? Or that the Valar would leave their thrones to step in now? How far would he have to go to be thrown down by God if it hadn't happened already? He is of the belief that the world has been made, and now its inhabitants can challenge for authority over it. And as the once mightiest member of the Ainur, why shouldn't it be him, the pride of evil? He is fighting God's children and God's servants, the only way he can challenge his maker. Unlike with Sauron, there is no past conflict he can look to as a warning to consider his actions. He is first, the original rebel who defines the misdeeds and evil labels we later place on others. Melkor fights for as long as possible, fully believing he will not be stopped until he is forced from the throne he made for himself. Both he and Sauron managed to deceive themselves in different ways when it came to the apparent indifference of Eru in relation to Arda, Middle-earth, and those dwelling within. Melkor as the mightiest of the Ainur, believing that he should be able to shape the world to his own will, or corrupt and destroy attempts made by others. Sauron believing the rebellion of the Númenóreans and apparent failure of the Valar caused Eru to abandon his children and to revoke the authority given to the Valar. Now he was free to shape Middle-earth according to his own will. Both swelling with pride, a sense of self-importance and divine power, neither believing their fight to be hopeless, neither being cast down by Eru directly, but both falling to defeat with the aid of those who never turned from the path of Eru, who never turned to evil. Thanks for listening to this episode. I think the fall of the Dark Lords and their motives allow for some of the most interesting and deep conversations related to the Legendarium. I'm always interested in hearing what others would like me to discuss when it comes to Sauron and Morgoth, so don't hesitate to contact me with episode or video ideas you have about these figures. It is complex though, and I haven't covered everything here. Look out for some future discussions related to Sauron's plans for Middle-earth, and the way the Valar dealt with the problem of Melkor, a conversation about free will and redemption that I hope to make down the line. Finally, I want to thank my top tier supporters over on Patreon for their continued engagement and support of this Red Book project. Thank you to Wavesailor, Oliver, Joel, David and Victus for your dedication to the channel. To supporters and all listeners, I really hope you enjoyed this and decide to return for the next chapter of the Red Book.